Have you ever faced a problem that seemed utterly insurmountable? A wall so formidable, a defense so perfect, that every attempt to breach it resulted in a crushing defeat. Imagine that feeling, magnified 1,000-fold, on a volcanic island lost in the ocean. This was the situation American Marines encountered on February 19, 1945, when they landed on Iwo Jima. How could such an impregnable fortress be overcome? What secret weapon could turn the tide of one of the bloodiest battles? And, most importantly, what lay behind the apparent invincibility that shattered all conventional wisdom? In this story, we will uncover the incredible tale of how something utterly unexpected changed the outcome of a battle that was destined to be a hopeless slaughter. We'll tell you how they stood in the shoes of those who faced an insurmountable force, and how they found a way out when there seemed to be none. Today, we'll reveal how expectations were shattered and how one decisive tactic made all the difference. Early on the morning of February 19, 1945, just 8 miles southeast of Japan's shores, on Iwo Jima, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi stood in his command bunker. He was surrounded by 3-foot-thick reinforced concrete walls, seemingly capable of withstanding any assault. Above him, deep within the volcanic rock, lay 500 more such fortifications. Each was designed to withstand the most ferocious American bombardment, transforming the island into an impregnable citadel. For many months, Allied forces had unleashed a barrage of shells upon these shelters. Direct hits, capable of leveling entire buildings, barely scratched the surface. Japanese soldiers proudly called their positions invincible. American Marines, in contrast, saw them only as deadly traps. Every frontal assault ended the same way. Waves of Marines cut down by fire, never reaching the bunker entrances. The mathematics of the confrontation were cruel and simple. 20,000 Japanese defenders, unlimited ammunition and ideal fields of fire, turning every meter into a kill zone. But that morning, something rolled onto the black sand beaches that no Japanese intelligence report had mentioned. They were 8 M4A3 Sherman tanks. At first glance, they appeared ordinary, except for one detail the defenders couldn't discern from their concrete fortifications. These tanks carried no shells. They were loaded with compressed napalm fuel cylinders. 100 yards of liquid fire on demand. The Japanese had built a perfect defense against everything they knew about American war tactics. They had no idea the Marines were about to completely change the rules of engagement. Stay with us and watch until the end, and we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The pre-dawn gloom of February 19, 1945, enveloped Iwo Jima in a deceptive calm. Captain David Shoup, cramped in a landing craft, reviewed intelligence photographs one last time. The images revealed what Allied commanders unanimously called the most formidable defensive position in the entire Pacific. The volcanic island had been transformed into a concrete fortress. 500 pillboxes, bunkers, and gun emplacements carved into the rock and reinforced with steel formed a unified network. Each position was linked to others, creating overlapping fields of fire, capable of mowing down attacking forces from multiple directions simultaneously. Shoup carefully folded the photographs and tucked them into his field jacket. Around him, Marines of K Company checked their weapons with the mechanical precision of men acutely aware of the odds ahead. The preliminary bombardment had been the heaviest in the history of the Pacific Theater. 74 days of continuous shelling had turned the island's surface into a lunar landscape of craters. Yet, aerial reconnaissance revealed a disturbing truth. The bunkers remained intact. 3 feet of reinforced concrete had withstood a bombardment that would have obliterated entire city blocks. 800 yards from shore, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi emerged from his command bunker to survey the American fleet gathering in the pre-dawn twilight. 900 ships stretched across the horizon, their silhouettes black against the star-filled sky. Kuribayashi had spent 8 months preparing for this moment, transforming Iwo Jima into what he believed was an impregnable fortress. His engineers had dug 11 miles of tunnels connecting defensive positions, allowing troops to move unseen between bunkers. Artillery pieces were positioned in caves carved deep into the volcanic rock, shielded from counter-battery fire by tons of rock above. The Japanese general had meticulously studied American tactics during his previous assignment in the United States. He well understood their preference for overwhelming firepower, followed by a direct infantry assault. His defensive system was designed to neutralize both these advantages. The bunkers were meant to absorb the bombardment and then mow down infantry attacks with concentrated machine gun and artillery fire. Simple, proven, mathematically sound. Stay with us and watch until the end, and we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. At 09:00, the engines of the landing craft roared to life. Shoop felt the deck vibrate beneath his boots as the Higgins boat surged toward the black sand beaches. The preliminary bombardment had ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the sound of diesel engines and churning water. Intelligence suggested the Marines were about to undertake the bloodiest assault in Corps history. Standard tactics called for an artillery barrage, followed by an infantry advance, supported by conventional tank fire. Every Marine in the landing craft understood the brutal arithmetic of bunker warfare. Attackers required overwhelming numerical superiority to overcome fortified positions. The first wave hit the beach at 09:30. Machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions, scything down Marines before they could advance beyond the waterline. Mortar shells rained down with lethal accuracy across the landing zone. Each explosion sent geysers of black sand and shrapnel through the ranks. Shoop watched as his men dove for cover behind scattered debris, pinned down 50 yards from the surf. The bunkers had withstood the bombardment exactly as Kuribayashi predicted. From his command post, the Japanese general monitored radio transmissions with grim satisfaction. His defensive plan was working perfectly. American casualties mounted, while his own forces remained protected within their concrete shelters. Overlapping fields of fire prevented any significant advance, forcing Marines to cluster in kill zones where artillery could decimate entire units. This was the battle Kuribayashi had prepared for. A grueling war of attrition that would bleed the Americans dry. But something was different about this assault, something that went beyond conventional strategies. Behind the first waves of infantry, 8 unusual Sherman tanks rolled off specialized landing craft onto the volcanic sand. These M4A3s looked identical to standard armor from a distance, but closer inspection revealed critical modifications. Where conventional tanks mounted 75 mm guns, These machines carried flamethrower equipment connected to massive fuel tanks. The flamethrower mechanism could project burning liquid up to 100 yards, far enough to reach bunker entrances from positions outside the effective range of small arms fire. This was the very thing that was about to break all conventional wisdom and turn the tide of a seemingly doomed battle. Small arms fire. Have you ever wondered what happens when the familiar rules of war suddenly cease to apply? When an enemy you've studied for years suddenly pulls something out of their sleeve that overturns all your assumptions. Today, we'll delve into one such story. A story that made the Japanese defenders of Iwo Jima experience true terror, and their general, for the first time, doubt his invincibility. What was this weapon that in a matter of seconds transformed impregnable bunkers into fiery furnaces? And how did it change the course of one of the bloodiest battles of World War II? Prepare to learn how a single technological innovation shattered conventional wisdom and forced seasoned warriors to confront something they could never have imagined. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Sergeant Walter Lutz, commander of the lead flamethrower tank, felt every nerve inside the steel hull of his machine. Beside him, in the cramped confines, were 400 gallons of napalm, compressed to 800 pounds per square inch. These armored behemoths, nicknamed Zippo tanks by the Marines for their ability to ignite instantly, were born of desperate necessity. Lutz, having undergone intensive training, masterfully coordinated fuel delivery and ignition timing, aiming for maximum destructive effect. Flamethrowers were incredibly effective against fortified positions, but their use carried colossal risks. Each fuel tank made the vehicle a potential bomb, and their limited range forced crews to advance directly into enemy fire. The Japanese defenders, to their misfortune, had never encountered flamethrower tanks. Their intelligence was silent on such armored vehicles, and their defensive structures were designed to repel conventional artillery and small arms fire. As Lutz's tank advanced toward the first bunker complex, the machine gunners inside the concrete fortress prepared to engage what appeared to be a standard Sherman. They had already repelled dozens of similar attacks using their proven tactic. Wait for the tank to approach, then concentrate fire on its vision slits and tracks. At 75 yards from the target bunker, Lutz gave the order. A stream of burning fuel erupted from the flamethrower nozzle, piercing the morning air like liquid lightning. The napalm struck the bunker's embrasure and surged inside, instantly transforming the concrete chamber into an inferno, with temperatures soaring above 2000 degrees. The Japanese soldiers inside had not a second to escape, nor even to comprehend what was happening. The reinforced concrete that was meant to protect them from artillery shells became a merciless oven, trapping superheated air and toxic smoke. In a matter of seconds, a supposedly impregnable position was neutralized. Marines, previously pinned down by machine gun fire from that bunker, suddenly found they could advance. However, the psychological effect surpassed the tactical advantage. Across the battlefield, Japanese defenders watched in horror as their strongest positions erupted in flames. The concrete walls they had trusted with their lives proved powerless against this new weapon. Kuribayashi, commanding the Japanese forces, received the initial reports with disbelief. Bunkers that had withstood months of bombardment were being destroyed in seconds by individual tanks. His meticulously constructed defensive system, based on proven principles of fortification warfare, was crumbling under the assault of a weapon he had never seen nor even imagined. The Americans had altered the fundamental nature of bunker warfare, and his preparations suddenly seemed inadequate. For the first time since arriving on Iwo Jima, the Japanese general felt the cold touch of doubt. "Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from in the comments." The concept of mounting flamethrowers on tanks arose from acute necessity, not strategic planning. Just 6 months prior, Marine Corps engineers at Quantico had anxiously observed the rising infantry casualties during Pacific Island assaults. They recognized that conventional weapons were incapable of effectively neutralizing Japanese bunker systems. Colonel Robert Blake, head of the Marine Corps Equipment Board, authorized experiments with flamethrower systems after reviewing casualty reports from Saipan and Guam. A standard infantry flamethrower had a range of only 40 yards, requiring soldiers to approach enemy positions within grenade-throwing distance. A tactically unfeasible task against well-protected bunkers. The solution lay in scaling up existing technology. But how? The Navy's Bureau of Ships had already developed flamethrower equipment for clearing beach obstacles, utilizing pressurized fuel delivery systems capable of projecting burning liquid over long distances. Blake's engineers adapted this naval equipment for installation on M4A3 Sherman tanks, creating hybrid vehicles that combined armored protection with devastating incendiary power. The modification process required removing the tank's 75mm gun and replacing it with a flamethrower nozzle connected to fuel tanks installed within the vehicle. Captain Robert McVeigh oversaw the conversion of the first 8 prototypes at Major Island Naval Shipyard in December 1944. Each tank carried 400 gallons of napalm, a mixture of gasoline thickened with polystyrene, to create a substance that burned longer and adhered to surfaces far more effectively than pure gasoline. The fuel system operated under pressure generated by compressed nitrogen cylinders, enabling crews to project flames up to 100 yards with enough accuracy to hit bunker embrasures from relatively safe positions. The flamethrower itself was a marvel of engineering precision. The nozzle assembly featured adjustable flow regulators that allowed crews to vary flame intensity from narrow streams for precise targeting to wide swathes for area denial. Ignition was achieved via pilot burners fueled by a separate system, ensuring reliable flame generation even in the harshest combat conditions. The entire system could provide continuous fire for 90 seconds, or approximately 30 individual bursts of flame, depending on duration and intensity settings. McVeigh insisted on extensive crew training before deploying the vehicles in combat. Tank crews had to master fuel system operations, flame projection techniques, and tactical employment procedures that differed fundamentally from conventional armor tactics. Unlike standard tanks engaging targets at maximum range, flamethrower tanks required close coordination with infantry and careful positioning to maximize effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. The vehicles were particularly vulnerable to artillery and anti-tank weapons due to their fuel loads and the necessity of operating at relatively short ranges. The tactical doctrine for flamethrower tank deployment evolved through trial and error during training exercises. McVeigh's crews learned to coordinate their attacks with advancing infantry, using conventional tanks for long-range fire support, while flamethrower tanks eliminated specific targets blocking infantry movement. The most effective technique involved approaching bunkers at oblique angles that masked the tank's advance until the final assault phase, where speed and surprise could overcome defensive fire. Sergeant Lutz became the most proficient flamethrower tank commander during training, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of flame tactics that impressed his instructors. Have you ever felt trapped in a situation that seemed utterly hopeless? Faced an obstacle that for months, or even years, successfully repelled every attack, forcing you to retreat, feeling powerless? Imagine being the one who built those impregnable walls, or the one desperately trying to overcome them. Today, we transport ourselves to the fields of one of World War II's bloodiest battles, where two wills clashed, and where the emergence of one seemingly experimental weapon forever changed the course of combat. How could an ordinary vehicle, modified for an entirely new purpose, become a symbol of both absolute terror and undeniable hope? Why did a gamble on an unproven weapon prove decisive in a battle where every yard of ground cost thousands of lives? And what forced even the most seasoned commanders to rethink fundamental tactical principles that once seemed unshakable? Stay with us and watch until the end, and we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Forget the familiar images of tanks firing from a distance. These steel behemoths were created for an entirely different purpose. For close quarters combat, for breaching the most powerful fortifications. What had held back entire battalions for years crumbled under the onslaught of flame, evoking a mix of shock and awe. What seemed indestructible was merely a matter of seconds. This isn't just a story about war. It's a story about how innovation and courage can break any mold and overcome any obstacle, even the most impregnable ones. The crew of each flamethrower tank represented the pinnacle of combat coordination. The driver, Private Johnson, the gunner, Corporal Martinez, and the loader, Private Davis, had honed every element of bunker assault to perfection. Their training was so intense that they could execute the most complex maneuvers without a single word, acting on instinct. Such synchronization demanded far more than conventional tank operations, as flamethrowing allowed no room for error in timing or positioning. But even the most meticulous preparation could not predict the true psychological impact of this weapon. No exercise could simulate the all-consuming terror that flamethrower tanks instilled in enemy soldiers, or the incredible boost in morale that swept through friendly forces when previously impregnable positions suddenly became vulnerable. Intelligence from the European theater of operations had already suggested that German forces often preferred to retreat rather than face a firestorm. However, the Pacific theater presented an entirely different challenge. Here, Japanese defensive tactics and deeply ingrained cultural factors made surrender exceedingly rare, multiplying the stakes. Furthermore, the logistics of flamethrower tank operations demanded a colossal support infrastructure. Each such vehicle consumed fuel at an incredible rate, many times exceeding the consumption of conventional ammunition. A single day of active combat could completely deplete a tank's fuel tanks, necessitating frequent and extremely dangerous resupply missions directly under enemy fire. The napalm mixture itself required specialized handling procedures and specific storage conditions, significantly complicating field logistics. In addition, the compressed nitrogen system, critical for the flamethrower's operation, required constant maintenance and pressure checks to ensure its reliability in the heat of battle. Stay with us and watch until the end, and we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The Marine Corps doctrine traditionally emphasized firepower and mobility, but the introduction of flamethrower tanks marked a significant departure from these established tactical principles. These specialized vehicles sacrificed long-range fire capability and vast ammunition stores for the unique ability to destroy bunkers. Such compromises forced commanders to re-evaluate fundamental assumptions about armored vehicle deployment, especially regarding tank-infantry interaction in assault operations. Conventional wisdom dictated that tanks should provide fire support from positions maximizing their armor protection and gun range. Flamethrower tanks, however, demanded aggressive positioning that exposed them to concentrated enemy fire, jeopardizing every advance. The decision to deploy only 8 flamethrower tanks to Iwo Jima reflected a dual constraint: resource scarcity and significant uncertainty regarding their actual combat effectiveness. Marine Corps planners allocated extremely limited space for these experimental weapons, prioritizing proven systems over unverified innovations. These 8 tanks represented the entire operational flamethrower arsenal available to the Pacific Fleet's Marine forces. This made their performance on Iwo Jima absolutely critical for the future development of flamethrower weapon programs, turning every burst into a test of survival. The technical specifications of the M4A3 flamethrower variant included armor thickness ranging from 25 to 76 mm, depending on the specific section, providing protection against small arms fire and shell fragments. Nevertheless, the vehicle remained vulnerable to anti-tank weapons and direct hits from heavy artillery. The tank's weight significantly increased from 33 to 37 tons due to extensive modifications to the fuel system. This, in turn, reduced the vehicle's overall mobility and increased ground pressure, posing serious challenges when traversing soft surfaces like sand. Engine performance remained sufficient for tactical movement, but fuel consumption dramatically rose due to the added weight and increased power demands for operating the flamethrower system. The flamethrower nozzle had limited mobility. It could only traverse 30° left or right from the tank's central axis, with an elevation adjustment from -10 to +20°. Such restricted rotation demanded exceptionally precise tank positioning to engage targets. The vehicle's hull had to be oriented directly towards the target area before effective flamethrowing became possible. Crew visibility was substantially restricted compared to conventional tanks due to modifications required to accommodate the complex fuel system. This made coordination with supporting infantry not merely desirable, but absolutely essential for comprehensive situational awareness and timely target identification. Private First Class Hiroshi Shigeta, hunkered deep within Bunker Complex 7 Alpha, watched as American tanks slowly but inexorably advanced across the killing field. His unit had spent months preparing this trap. The concrete walls around him, 3 feet thick, were reinforced with steel rebar and designed to withstand direct hits even from battleship guns. His Type 96 machine gun was perfectly positioned to cover the primary approach route, creating deadly fields of fire in conjunction with adjacent positions. This ensured that no enemy could cross the open ground without incurring monstrous casualties. Everything proceeded exactly as planned until the lead American tank stopped approximately 75 yards away and pointed something entirely unlike a gun barrel in his direction. The stream of liquid fire that erupted from Lutz's tank transformed the battlefield in a way no tactical manual could have foreseen. Shigeta, frozen in horror, watched as the burning fuel hurtled through the air like molten lightning, striking directly into his bunker's firing slit with the force of a dragon's breath. The napalm crashed against the concrete and steel, then poured through the opening like burning water, instantly filling the chamber with flames exceeding 2,000 degrees. The reinforced walls that had protected him from months of artillery bombardment instantly became a superheated oven, trapping the scorching air and deadly smoke. Shigeta's screams ceased in less than 3 seconds before the inferno consumed all oxygen in the confined space, leaving only silence. Captain Shoop, from his position 50 yards behind the tank assault line, witnessed the complete destruction of the bunker. The concrete structure, which had held 2 platoons of Marines at bay for 3 hours, simply erupted in a brilliant flash of flame, then fell instantly silent. There was no more machine gun fire. No more mortar rounds whistled over the beach. The position, identified by intelligence as a key defensive strong point, had been completely neutralized by a single 8-second burst of flame. Shoop, grasping the magnitude of what had occurred, grabbed his radio and immediately demanded coordination between the remaining flamethrower tanks and his infantry companies. If this new weapon could destroy bunkers so effectively, the entire tactical situation on Iwo Jima had to change, and change radically. Imagine a fortress built for months, every stone, every layer of concrete imbued with confidence in its impregnability. You stand behind these walls, certain of your protection, but then the world around you erupts in liquid fire. How is this possible? What kind of weapon is capable of turning the tide of an entire battle with its mere appearance, breaking the will of even the most resilient defenders? Have you ever been in a situation where all your efforts, all your calculations proved powerless against something completely unexpected? We know that feeling when a carefully constructed strategy crumbles before your eyes. But the story we are about to tell will show how, even in the most desperate conditions, a solution can be found to turn the tide, transforming seemingly impregnable bastions into ash in a matter of seconds. In this video, we will uncover the secret of how one new weapon completely revolutionized defense tactics that had been developed over months. What was it like for the soldiers who faced this fiery power for the first time? And how did these dragons change not only the outcome of individual battles, but also the entire strategy of a campaign? Stay with us and watch until the end, because we will be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you are watching us from. Tactics, it seemed, had to change. Lieutenant Lutz, inside his tank, smoothly rotated the turret 10 degrees to the left, locking onto a new target. Before him stood a formidable reinforced pillbox, housing a deadly 75 mm anti-tank gun. This strong point was a critical defensive element, covering the main route to the island's heart. Japanese engineers had constructed it from 5-foot thick reinforced concrete, and the gun embrasure was further protected by steel plates. Standard tank shells simply ricocheted off this structure, causing no damage, and an infantry assault would have been suicidal due to crossfire from adjacent positions. Lutz, aware of his weapon's unique capabilities, ordered his driver to close the distance by 20 yards, reducing it to 60 yards. This ensured maximum penetrative power for the impending fiery assault. The anti-tank gun crew, entrenched in the concrete pillbox, could not have imagined what they were about to face. Their months of training had focused on recognizing standard armored vehicles and practicing engagement algorithms for conventional tanks, where aiming accuracy and proper shell selection for each target type played a key role. Corporal Yamamoto, the gunner, as Lutz's tank began to approach, was already preparing for a fight with what appeared to be a regular Sherman, and the distance seemed ideal for effective fire. The strange flamethrower nozzle protruding from the tank's hull was not identified as part of a deadly weapon system. Japanese intelligence simply lacked data on American tanks equipped with flamethrowers. Yamamoto was just finishing adjusting his gun's elevation when suddenly his entire world turned into a raging liquid inferno. A powerful stream of napalm struck directly into the gun embrasure with terrifying precision, instantly pouring inside and coating every surface of the pillbox. Concrete, steel, and of course human flesh. Everything was engulfed in the tenacious burning fuel. The gun crew perished almost instantly, overwhelmed by superheated gases that scorched their lungs before they could even take a single breath. The powerful 75mm gun, which only a minute before had been a formidable force, capable of stopping any tank on the battlefield, was now reduced to a pile of useless glowing metal. Its casemate was completely engulfed in fire that would rage for at least another 6 hours. This key position, which controlled the main central approach to the strategically vital Mount Suribachi, was entirely neutralized in less than 10 seconds. But what happened next as news of this new kind of weapon spread across the island? At the same time, McVeigh, a senior officer, coordinated the advance of the remaining 7 flamethrower tanks, which moved cautiously across the uneven volcanic beach. Each vehicle received specific target instructions, determined in close conjunction with infantry unit commanders. The tactical deployment of these fire-breathing machines required not just interaction, but deep integration with supporting forces. These tanks, despite their destructive power, remained vulnerable to enemy fire when approaching targets and desperately needed infantry cover to prevent desperate Japanese attacks with satchel charges or magnetic mines. However, the reality of the battlefield proved far more complex than exercises prescribed. Radio communications constantly failed amidst active combat, and thick smoke from burning positions significantly hampered visual signaling. But even these difficulties could not stop the wave of panic that had already begun to engulf Japanese ranks. The psychological effect of these fiery attacks instantly propagated throughout the network of Japanese defensive positions on the island. Soldiers who had spent months constructing what they rightly considered impregnable fortifications watched in horror as their most powerful bunkers literally burst into flames and fell silent forever in a matter of seconds. The concrete walls in which they had entrusted their lives proved utterly helpless against this new weapon, capable of penetrating embrasures like molten water. Radio intercepts from forward positions were filled with desperate messages. American tanks were described as true dragons, spewing fire. This sowed panic among the defenders, whose training was geared towards traditional methods of warfare, not a confrontation with something that defied all their experience or understanding. Stay with us and watch until the end, because we will be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you are watching us from. General Kuribayashi, in his command bunker deep beneath Mount Suribachi, watched the developing tactical situation with growing concern. Increasingly desperate radio messages from forward unit commanders landed on his desk. The American advance was progressing at a speed unforeseen by any of his staff's scenarios. Defensive positions designed for days of resistance were falling within hours. Flamethrower tanks were destroying fortifications with such astonishing rapidity that his reserves simply could not reinforce threatened sectors. His meticulously planned and constructed defensive system, intended to funnel American attacks into predefined killing zones, was now literally crumbling before his eyes. The fiery tanks were breaking through positions that formed the core of his entire, carefully calibrated strategy, leaving behind only ash and chaos. But how were the Americans managing to maintain such a tempo of advance without risking being cut off from their main forces? However, this astonishing tactical success of the flamethrower tanks also created entirely new challenges for Marine Corps commanders. Infantry companies, which had previously been pinned down for hours by dense machine gun fire, now suddenly found themselves able to advance rapidly through terrain previously considered absolutely impassable. Such a speed of breakthrough, while desirable, threatened to outpace both artillery support and logistical supply, creating the risk of isolated groups of Marines deep within enemy territory. Major Shoup immediately began coordinating with battalion headquarters, striving to ensure that the pace of conventional tanks and artillery matched the rapid onslaught of the flamethrower vehicles, thereby maintaining vital mutual support among all weapon systems. And while these events unfolded on the front lines, what was happening inside the flamethrower vehicles themselves, ensuring their uninterrupted operation? Inside one such tank, Private Davis, serving as loader and crewman in Lieutenant Lutz's tank, tirelessly fed compressed nitrogen into the complex fuel system. His gaze constantly darted across the pressure gauges, which indicated the remaining flamethrower fuel supply. Each powerful burst of napalm consumed approximately 12 gallons of fuel, and the total 400-gallon tank capacity allowed for about 30 individual fiery attacks, after which urgent replenishment was required. The logistics of flamethrower tank operations differed dramatically from providing for conventional armored units, as fuel consumption here significantly exceeded ammunition expenditure. Davis mentally calculated that his tank had enough fuel for 6 more bunker attacks before needing to return to the beach for refueling. But what awaited them in the next third bunker complex, which had become their new target? The third bunker complex, now targeted by Lutz's tank, represented far more than just a firing position. It housed a crucial communications center that coordinated all defensive fire for the island's southeast sector. Within this powerful fortification, Japanese radio operators maintained continuous contact with numerous artillery batteries hidden in caves across the volcanic terrain. They not only directed precise counter-battery fire against American positions, but also coordinated defensive maneuvers between scattered strongpoints. The destruction of this facility would mean completely blinding General Kuribayashi's forces in a critically important area of the battlefield, disrupting the vital command and control system that was the backbone of his entire defensive network. And now, with the target identified, how was this vital point struck? Corporal Martinez, the tank's experienced flamethrower operator, meticulously adjusted the projector nozzle, aiming for maximum stream penetration. He then activated the ignition sequence. Pilot burners immediately flickered, powered by a separate propane system, ensuring reliable flame generation even in the harshest combat conditions. The fuel gauge confidently displayed optimal operating parameters, and the precise traverse mechanism aligned the projector with the target bunker's main communication antenna. In this moment, with all systems ready, the fate of an entire sector of defense hung in the balance. Have you ever felt invincible, only to then discover an Achilles heel you never suspected? Imagine a weapon capable of turning the strongest fortifications into a blazing inferno with a single shot, yet itself fatally vulnerable. How is this possible? Today, we will delve into a story where unprecedented destructive power clashed with sophisticated tactical thinking and reveal precisely how this fatal vulnerability was discovered and exploited, turning the tide of a seemingly predetermined battle. This is a story of how even the most formidable tools of war can be broken if the enemy manages to find their weak spot. Then, in those days, when it seemed there were no obstacles for the advancing forces, Martinez, operating the combat vehicle, pressed the trigger. A powerful stream of napalm, erupting under pressure, cut across 60 yards of the volcanic sand-pocked landscape, crashing into the bunker entrance with the furious intensity of concentrated hellfire. In an instant, the communication center was transformed into a flaming abyss. The fire, spreading with terrifying speed, reached every corner of the underground complex, destroying thousands of dollars worth of radio equipment and instantly killing the technical specialists who provided vital communication with Japanese artillery batteries located across the island. The loss of this single communication point sowed chaos in the defensive formations over several square miles, condemning isolated bunkers to independent resistance, devoid of mutual support and coordinated fire tasks. But the true significance of what transpired was not just in the physical devastation. The tactical effect of these strikes proved far more extensive than merely destroying concrete and steel. General Kuribayashi's ability to react promptly to American advances catastrophically diminished with each communication node destroyed by a flamethrower attack. By 2 p.m. on the first day of the assault, in just a few hours, the 8 flamethrower tanks had already obliterated 27 bunkers, pillboxes, and other defensive positions, targets that were originally planned to be captured over the entire first week of operations. This astonishing breakthrough exceeded all the most optimistic planning calculations, opening up unprecedented opportunities for the advancing forces to rapidly exploit their success. threatening the complete collapse of Japanese resistance in the southern part of the island. Stay with us and watch until the end, because it's only gonna get more interesting. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. What was once perceived as an experimental system proved its devastating effectiveness against fortifications that just hours before were considered absolutely impregnable. But every coin has two sides, and the Japanese counterattack was not long in coming. It began on February 21st at 5:30 p.m., when Kuribayashi's artillery batteries moved from their carefully camouflaged cave positions, unleashed a barrage of concentrated fire on the advancing Flamethrower tanks. The general had spent 48 hours meticulously analyzing the new American weapon, and his conclusions were grim for the enemy. The fuel systems of these vehicles represented critical vulnerabilities that could be effectively exploited with precise artillery fire. His artillery commanders received strict orders. Flamethrower tanks now had the highest priority over any other armored vehicles. To destroy them, they were instructed to use high explosive shells specifically designed to penetrate fuel tanks and provoke catastrophic secondary explosions. And once again, a reminder. Don't forget to stay with us until the very end so you don't miss the key moments of this incredible story. Your likes and subscriptions are very important to us. And please share in the comments which city or country you're watching us from. The very first artillery volley struck Lieutenant Leitz's tank as his vehicle approached the fortified ridge, sending fountains of volcanic sand and deadly steel shrapnel scattering across the battlefield. Lieutenant Leitz physically felt the powerful concussion from the near misses shake his tank, while Japanese artillerymen adjusted their fire with devilish precision, targeting his exact position. The M4A3 tank's armor was certainly capable of withstanding small arms fire and shell fragments, but direct hits from 75mm artillery rounds could penetrate the hull and ignite the 400 gallons of napalm fuel carefully stored inside. Private Johnson, his driver, masterfully performed evasive maneuvers, while Leitz, pressed against the periscope, desperately tried to locate the source of enemy fire. The Japanese, in turn, displayed astonishing ingenuity, meticulously camouflaging their gun positions with volcanic ash and debris, making counter-battery fire extremely difficult, even when the guns revealed their location with bright muzzle flashes. And here we see the first hint of the next stage: psychological pressure. The vulnerability of flamethrower tanks to artillery fire was of course well known and had been identified during training phases. However, real combat conditions proved far more severe and unpredictable than even the most detailed simulations could foresee. Tank crews caught under heavy fire now constantly lived under the sword of Damocles, threatened by a catastrophic fuel explosion. This generated a level of psychological stress that significantly exceeded normal combat loads. The awareness that just one penetrating hit could instantly transform their formidable machine into a blazing fireball profoundly impacted the entire crew's performance and their tactical decisions. No amount of training could adequately prepare them for such pressure. Lieutenant Leitz's crew, despite this, maintained astonishing discipline. But the strain of operating what was essentially a mobile bomb was clearly evident in their clipped, tense radio communications and occasionally hesitant movements. But how did commanders cope with this new, deadly challenge? In this critical situation, Captain McVeigh, from his command tank, took charge of coordinating defensive measures. He ordered conventional armor to engage in counter-battery fire, attempting to suppress the Japanese guns, while the vulnerable flamethrower tanks retreated to pre-designated covered positions. The original tactical doctrine for flamethrower tanks, it turned out, completely failed to account for the possibility of prolonged artillery engagement. It focused solely on swift bunker assaults followed by immediate withdrawal. The Japanese counterattack forced Marine Corps commanders to adapt their tactics in real time, finding a delicate balance between the urgent need to protect the vulnerable flamethrower tanks and the unwavering requirement to maintain offensive momentum. McVeigh, demonstrating tactical acumen, ordered his remaining 7 flamethrower tanks to operate in pairs, one vehicle providing covering fire, while the other maneuvered, attempting to find safe cover. But even these precautions could not always prevent the worst. However, despite all efforts and new tactical approaches, the first catastrophic loss was not long in coming. At 6:45 p.m., a Japanese 105mm howitzer fired a fatal shot that directly struck the flamethrower tank commanded by Sergeant Peters. The high explosive shell penetrated the vehicle's side armor with terrifying ease and detonated inside the fuel compartment. This instantly ignited the 400 gallons of napalm, creating a colossal fireball that soared 300 feet above the ravaged volcanic landscape. The explosion was so powerful that it was clearly visible even from ships far out at sea, and the resulting mushroom cloud became an ominous harbinger of the destruction of 1/8 of the Marine Corps' entire flamethrower tank supply. The crew perished instantly, vaporized in temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The repercussions of this explosion were far-reaching, affecting not only combat effectiveness but also the morale of the survivors. The psychological impact of Sergeant Peters' death instantly spread among all remaining tank crews. Every soldier now realized that their formidable machines could be transformed into blazing crematories by just one accurately aimed artillery shell. This loss represented not only a crushing blow to morale, but also a significant tactical setback, as each destroyed flamethrower tank reduced the Marines' ability to demolish Japanese bunkers by 12%. With only 7 vehicles remaining, commanders faced extremely difficult decisions, forced to carefully weigh the risk-benefit ratio in every subsequent operation. The weapon that yesterday seemed invincible and invulnerable due to its initial success now appeared fragile and terrifyingly susceptible to ingenious enemy countermeasures. And the Japanese had no intention of stopping there. Japanese artillery observers, demonstrating remarkable adaptability, immediately adjusted their fire, carefully studying the lessons learned from the first successful engagement. Their attention was now focused on the limited mobility of flamethrower tanks and their predictable approach routes to target bunkers. Battery commanders received detailed intelligence on the characteristics of American vehicles, including precise fuel tank capacity, armor thickness, and tactical deployment procedures observed over the previous 2 days of fierce fighting. This invaluable information allowed Japanese artillerymen to establish kill zones with surgical precision along the most likely tank routes, creating overlapping fields of fire. They could now strike flamethrower tanks at their most vulnerable moments, turning them from formidable weapons into easy prey. Do you think you've been in a hopeless situation? Well, imagine this. You're on a battlefield where every step could be your last, and your most powerful weapon turns out to be a double-edged sword. Sound familiar? Perhaps you've also faced a situation where solving one problem created a dozen new ones. In this video, we'll delve into a story where heroes had to confront incredible difficulties, where every victory brought a new challenge. How did they manage to endure when their own means of defense became their weakness? And what happened when the enemy began to adapt to their most formidable weapon? Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. So, let's talk about those moments when even the most powerful machines are pushed to their limits. Leeds's tank, for example, masterfully maneuvered on Iwo Jima, using the terrain's folds to hide from Japanese observers. The island's volcanic landscape seemed tailor-made for cover, where tanks could wait between assaults. However, these same landscape features, which offered an advantage, simultaneously guided them along predictable paths that Japanese artillery could pre-range. This meant that at any moment, the vehicle could come under intense fire. Commanders faced an extremely complex tactical challenge: how to protect flamethrower tanks without sacrificing their offensive potential. Unconventional solutions, going beyond standard armored doctrine, were required. Leeds found a way by coordinating actions with infantry smoke teams. They created dense screens that effectively concealed tank movements during approach, significantly reducing the effectiveness of Japanese observation posts. But the problems didn't end there. Soon, another seemingly minor but extremely dangerous threat emerged: a fuel supply crisis. It could halt flamethrower tank operations even without direct combat engagement. Each vehicle consumed an average of 60 gallons of napalm fuel per hour during active operations. This meant a 400-gallon tank would be depleted in just 7 hours of continuous combat. The logistical chain required to maintain such supplies proved overwhelming for existing coastal support facilities. Engineers had to establish forward fuel depots, literally under enemy fire. Moreover, napalm itself was not the easiest to handle. This thickened gasoline mixture required heating to maintain the necessary fluidity, especially in cold weather, adding another headache. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. After Peter's death, Sergeant Martinez took command of the second flamethrower tank. He inherited a crew that had witnessed their lead vehicle literally explode in a fireball, leaving nothing recognizable behind. The psychological trauma of operating a weapon capable of incinerating them themselves affected the soldiers' combat effectiveness. Reaction time slowed, and coordination among crew members deteriorated under stress. Martinez, understanding this, implemented crew rotation procedures to prevent psychological breakdowns. He ensured that no individual remained at peak stress levels for too long, providing them rest during combat operations. Meanwhile, Japanese defensive tactics rapidly adapted. Kuribayashi's engineers developed countermeasures specifically designed to repel flamethrower attacks. Bunkers were modified with water spray systems capable of extinguishing napalm fires. ventilation was improved to reduce the effectiveness of flame penetration, and structural changes were made to deflect liquid fuel away from critical areas. Of course, due to limited resources, these modifications could not be implemented at all defensive positions. However, they demonstrated systematic efforts to neutralize the advantage of American flamethrower weapons through engineering solutions, rather than just tactical maneuvers. Combat engineers from the 5th Marine Division deployed repair bases behind the front lines to support the remaining flamethrower tanks. They understood perfectly that mechanical failures posed as great a threat to these specialized vehicles as enemy action. Flamethrower systems required constant maintenance due to the corrosive effects of napalm fuel on metal components and the high pressure needed for its delivery. Technical specialists worked around the clock to keep the tanks combat-ready, often performing repairs under artillery fire, as Japanese artillerymen deliberately shelled support facilities alongside forward combat units. By February 23rd, a tactical stalemate had developed, reflecting both sides' adaptation to the new battlefield conditions. Japanese forces had learned to counter flamethrower attacks through improved artillery fire and defensive modifications. At the same time, Marine commanders struggled to protect their vulnerable flamethrower tanks without sacrificing their offensive capabilities. The initial breakthrough, which seemed to promise a quick victory, had given way to a war of attrition. Such a war favored the well-prepared positions of the defenders and their interior lines of communication. The 8 experimental weapons that had changed the initial phase of the battle now represented a diminishing resource, requiring careful use for critical operations. McVeigh received orders to preserve the remaining tanks for the final assault on Mount Suribachi. He fully understood that the specialized capabilities of these machines would be essential for capturing the fortress complex crowning Iwo Jima's southern peak. The decision to withdraw flamethrower tanks from routine bunker-clearing operations was a result of harsh lessons learned regarding their vulnerability and sustainability in prolonged combat. A weapon that initially seemed a simple solution to tactical problems, in reality, demanded as meticulous planning and resource management as conventional systems, with the added complexity of extreme vulnerability to enemy countermeasures. The assault on Mount Suribachi began on March 10th at 06 MAS. 5 surviving flamethrower tanks spearheaded the decisive strike against Kuribayashi's command complex. The volcanic peak rose 554 feet above the battlefield, honeycombed with tunnels and chambers that had taken 8 months to excavate. Intelligence suggested that 3,000 Japanese defenders remained within the mountain fortress, sheltered by 15 feet of solid rock and concrete barriers capable of withstanding direct hits from 16-inch naval guns. Captain McVeigh positioned his tanks in a semicircle around the base of the mountain, coordinating with artillery observers to identify cave entrances requiring flamethrower treatment. Leitz's tank approached the main tunnel entrance on the eastern slope of the mountain, where a 75mm anti-tank gun had held up infantry assaults for 3 days. The cave entrance was protected by a 6-inch thick steel door with firing slits that allowed the gun crew to engage targets while remaining protected from counter-battery fire. Conventional explosives had failed to breach the entrance, and infantry attempts to approach the position resulted in heavy casualties from supporting machine gun nests located higher on the slopes. We all know that feeling when a seemingly impenetrable wall rises before us. That moment when all familiar methods shatter against harsh reality and every attempt seems hopeless. It was precisely this helplessness that the forces trying to break through Iwo Jima's reinforced concrete fortifications faced. How could steel doors, designed to withstand hundreds of pounds of explosives, be breached? How could the deadly fire pouring from every crevice be stopped if even the most powerful tanks turned into twisted metal? And could liquid flame be the key that would open the path to victory where all other means had failed? Today, we will delve into a story where, on the brink of despair, a solution was found that changed the course of one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. Forget traditional assaults and frontal attacks. What you're about to witness is not just a military chronicle, but a demonstration of how one innovative idea could redefine impregnability. Japanese engineers were confident. American soldiers would lack the means to overcome their titanic barriers. They miscalculated. They failed to account for one thing: the power of liquid fire, capable of flowing through the smallest embrasures like molten water, transforming the strongest fortifications into deadly traps. We will show you exactly how this paradoxical method shattered seemingly invulnerable positions, paving the way for victory. Stay with us and watch until the end, for this is only the beginning of an incredible story. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, please tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. In conditions where every conventional assault resulted in excessive casualties, only one weapon could turn the tide: the flamethrower tank. The path to the main entrance of the cave complex stretched across 800 yards of completely open ground, mercilessly swept by crossfire from multiple defensive positions. Furthermore, Japanese observers, entrenched in the mountain caves, possessed the ability to precisely direct artillery fire onto any vehicle daring to approach the anti-tank nest. This death zone had already claimed 2 conventional tanks in previous unsuccessful breach attempts. To overcome this hell, Lieutenant Leitz devised a complex operation. He closely coordinated with smoke teams to create an impenetrable visual screen, while artillery batteries shelled the area with white phosphorus rounds, further concealing his tank's advance across the dangerously open terrain. The impregnability of these positions was largely ensured by the titanic steel door that sealed the cave entrance. This was no ordinary barrier. Manufactured at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, it arrived on Iwo Jima in pieces during the defensive preparations. This colossal barrier weighed a full 12 tons and was designed to withstand explosive charges up to 500 pounds. Thanks to a complex internal reinforcement system that distributed the blast wave throughout its structure. Japanese engineers confidently believed that the Americans simply lacked the specialized equipment capable of overcoming such massive obstacles, rendering these cave positions virtually invulnerable to any traditional assault. But in their calculations, they overlooked one fatal detail. They did not foresee that a river of fire could seep through tiny embrasures like boiling water and engulf those hiding behind this insurmountable wall. If you appreciate stories of strategic genius and incredible resilience, stay with us and watch until the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It greatly helps the channel grow. And of course, we eagerly await your comments, indicating the city from which you are watching us. Private Johnson, skillfully maneuvering Leetz's tank, navigated the cratered landscape with surgical precision. He expertly utilized every shell crater and pile of debris as temporary cover, all while maintaining the high speed vital for minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Every ton of the 37-ton vehicle kicked up clouds of volcanic dust, which, on one hand, provided additional camouflage, but on the other, inevitably revealed its position to Japanese observers with binoculars. Soon, artillery shells began landing around the tank. Japanese artillerymen desperately tried to bracket their target, sending geysers of black sand and deadly steel fragments along their entire route. Just 200 yards from the cave entrance, at the most intense moment, Leeds ordered his gunner to prepare for flamethrowing as the tank maneuvered into an ideal attack position. The steel door, the one that had seemed impenetrable, now dominated Leetz's periscope. Its surface was scarred with bullet marks and shell fragments from countless unsuccessful assaults. The embrasures, those narrow slits, appeared as barely visible, dark rectangles in the massive metal barrier. However, thanks to meticulous analysis of reconnaissance photographs, they had precise measurements, allowing for astonishingly accurate aiming. The plan was audacious. The napalm stream was not merely to strike the door, but to penetrate these embrasures, entering the chamber behind them. There, it was calculated, it would ignite stored ammunition and, crucially, eliminate the entire gun crew using not only searing heat, but also suffocating toxic gases. 12 seconds, that's how long the fiery salvo lasted, projecting 200 gallons of napalm the remaining distance to the cave entrance. The burning fuel slammed into the steel door and, like liquid lightning, poured through the embrasures, instantly filling the inner chamber with flames exceeding 2000 degrees F, approximately 883 degrees C. The anti-tank gun crew was doomed. Their death came in seconds as they suffocated from superheated gases that scorched their lungs before they could even approach the chamber's rear exit. The 75mm gun, which had dominated the entire eastern approach, was finally silenced, its barrel glowing red-hot from the inferno that consumed its position. The destruction of this anti-tank gun not only eliminated a threat, it created a vital breach in Kuribayashi's defensive perimeter, which infantry companies immediately began to exploit to reach the base of the mountain. Captain Shoup, seizing the moment, led his Marines through the breach, using the fire-scorched rocks for cover. They rapidly advanced towards secondary cave entrances, where machine gun nests and mortar positions lay hidden. The sight of their seemingly strongest defensive point being instantly engulfed by a storm of fire had a devastating psychological effect on the Japanese soldiers manning auxiliary positions. Many were demoralized and unwilling to share the fate of their comrades, abandoned their posts without waiting for similar destruction. Meanwhile, McVeigh directed the remaining 4 flamethrower tanks to other cave systems located on the northern and western slopes of the mountain. There, Japanese defenders had established a complex network of overlapping fields of fire that completely controlled all possible approaches to the summit. These positions, though smaller in scale than the main tunnel complex, were no less securely protected by massive concrete barriers and steel doors, completely blocking direct access to the inner chambers. This time, The flamethrower tanks had to operate in complete isolation. The challenging terrain prevented mutual support between the vehicles and significantly limited artillery support due to extremely steep firing angles. The second flamethrower tank, commanded by Sergeant Martinez, received its target. A machine gun nest skillfully carved directly into the mountainside, 300 feet, approximately 90 meters above sea level. This position was strategically crucial as it provided an unobstructed view of the entire western beach area and had continuously shelled landing operations for 2 weeks. Any infantry attempts to assault this cave had failed due to the incredibly steep approach route and heavy supporting fire from adjacent positions. The flamethrower tank once again proved to be the only solution capable of neutralizing this threat without unacceptable losses for the assault companies. The cave itself, housing this machine gun nest, was a masterpiece of Japanese fortification engineering. It had been excavated using advanced mining technologies honed in Manchuria, with inner chambers extending 60 feet, approximately 18 meters, deep into the solid rock. The entrance was securely covered by a massive concrete barrier, featuring only a narrow firing embrasure, barely 18 inches, approximately 45 centimeters, wide. Through this slit, the machine gun could fire unimpeded at targets while remaining completely protected from return fire. Furthermore, the walls of the inner chamber were lined with steel sheets to prevent collapses, thereby creating a sealed space capable of containing flames and lethal toxic gases for an extended period. Martinez, confronted with these incredible conditions, took up a position on a specially carved ledge on the mountainside. He engaged the vehicle's hydraulic stabilization system to ensure maximum accuracy while firing upward at a 45-degree angle. The flamethrower's elevation mechanism had been specifically modified for such extreme conditions. However, the physics of projecting liquid fuel at such steep angles inevitably created significant accuracy challenges. These difficulties, it turned out, had not been entirely resolved even during the most intensive training exercises. Now, the stream of napalm had to not merely launch, but arc through the air like an artillery shell before striking the narrow cave entrance with sufficient force and penetrating inside to complete its deadly mission. Have you ever felt confronted by something utterly impregnable? Walls seemed too thick, defenses impenetrable, and any attempt to breach them led only to despair and exhaustion. What if I told you that even the most formidable fortresses, built with incredible resilience and foresight, can fall in mere minutes? How is this possible? And crucially, what is the cost of such a crushing victory? Today, we will delve into one of the most dramatic chapters of military history, where human ingenuity clashed with the relentless power of a new, experimental weapon. We will discover how seemingly invulnerable defensive positions were shattered, which tactical approaches proved truly decisive, and the colossal psychological effect this had on those who held the line until their last breath. Prepare yourself, as we begin at the moment an impregnable stronghold transformed into a blazing inferno in a matter of seconds. The fiery discharge, like a living entity, arced upward into the cold morning air, following a ballistic trajectory that ended with brutal precision directly at the cave entrance. Napalm surged through the narrow firing embrasure, instantly filling the entire chamber with burning fuel This sticky, hellish flame adhered to every surface, consuming the oxygen necessary to sustain life. The machine gun crew occupying this position perished instantly. Following them, 20 rounds stored nearby detonated, illuminating the cave's interior like a superheated furnace. The position that controlled the western approaches to Mount Suribachi was eliminated in 15 seconds of continuous flame. Stay with us and watch until the end, as there are many more astonishing details to this story. We would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. By noon on March 10th, in just a few hours, 5 flamethrower tanks had already destroyed 47 cave positions, bunkers, and defensive strongpoints. These fortifications formed the bedrock of Japanese resistance on Mount Suribachi. Seeming unshakable, yet systematically crumbled under the assault of this new weapon. The systematic elimination of these key points created extensive breaches in the defensive perimeter, which infantry companies could now exploit to break through and reach the mountain's summit. However, tactical damage was only one side of the coin. The psychological impact surpassed all expectations, as Japanese defenders watched in horror as their most reliable, carefully constructed positions were consumed by a weapon against which they had absolutely no effective defense. It was a sight capable of breaking even the most resilient. Don't change the channel, because the climax of this drama is approaching, and it will be truly incredible. Stay with us and watch until the end. We would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and please don't forget to tell us in the comments which city or country you are watching from. The final assault on General Kuribayashi's command bunker required a truly coordinated effort from all 5 remaining flamethrower tanks. They converged on this reinforced chamber, buried a full 50 feet beneath the mountain's summit. This position was designed as an impregnable fortress, the embodiment of engineering prowess. 10-foot-thick concrete walls and numerous escape routes connected by a complex tunnel system that laced through the entire mountain. Intelligence persistently suggested that Kuribayashi himself remained inside this chamber, directing Iwo Jima's last desperate defense from a location he rightly considered absolutely impregnable. The flamethrower attack that ultimately broke Japanese resistance on Iwo Jima lasted 37 minutes. These minutes became an eternity for the besieged, as 5 tanks systematically and relentlessly destroyed every defensive position, every fortified nook on the slopes and summit of Mount Suribachi. When the flames finally subsided, the mountain fortress, previously thought invincible, lay in ruins. Its tunnels were filled with acrid smoke, and its defenders were silenced forever. A weapon that just 3 weeks prior seemed merely an experimental curiosity had proven its incredible ability to crush the most formidable defensive positions the great Japanese Empire could ever construct. This story is a vivid example of how battlefield innovations can change the course of an entire war, and how even the most impregnable bastions can fall before a new, irresistible force.